Welcome, today I'll be teaching you how to make this wind shader with actual proper bending rather than just displacement. This results in very satisfying grass fields with very sexy propagation. Now this shader works with stylized grass or more realistic grass. Additionally, this is a universal shader that works with grass, trees, bushes, vines, you name it. Now this is a URP shader, so you want to either create your project in the URP pipeline, or if you already have a project just not on URP, you could download it through the package manager. Make sure you migrate all of your broken materials and set up the pipeline correctly. Now the focus is on the wind shader, but if you don't have any models, I will show you how to make a simple grass model so you can follow along. Skip to the next chapter if you already have your own models. Now to make the simplest of grass models, Shift A, add a plane, rotate it by 90 degrees on the x-axis, bring it up by 1 unit, duplicate the plane and rotate it by 90 degrees. Believe it or not, you're almost done with the base mesh. But there is one problem. When you try to bend it, which is the point of this wind shader, it looks wacky. To fix this, you want to add some more topology. And now when it bends, it looks more natural and more realistic. Now you may be asking, this doesn't look like grass at all. Well, you're right, because we need to make a mask. To do this, we add another plane, rotate it, and move it off to the side. Then we scale it down to be more of a grassy strand kind of thing. Add some more topology, bevel it with Control B to add even more topology. Take that strand and duplicate it and move it around, rotate it, but make sure to keep it within the bounding box, except for the bottom. The bottom should actually go outside. Scooch some vertices around to get a little bit more detail and a little bit more chaos in the grass, because grass is nothing but organized. Add a subdivision modifier with Control 3 to make it more smooth, and make sure you select the bottom and increase the mean vertex crease to 1. Next up, you want to add a material, because we're going to be writing this out. You can delete the principal BSDF and add an emissive node and connect it to the output. And now when you head into rendered mode, you'll see that the grass is white, and that is exactly what you want when you render this out. Also, make sure the background is either black or transparent. Select the resolution to either 1024 or 512. Add a camera, make sure it's centered, and move it back. Change the type from perspective to orthographic, and change the orthographic scale so it matches it just perfectly. Hit F12 to render it out, and you can see you have a black and white mask, or a white and alpha mask. Save this image to your desktop, and the base grass is all set up. Now if you want to have the maximum amount of control of your wind, you need to make one adjustment in Blender. You want to select your object and add a second UV map. Make sure it is the second one, the hierarchy is very important. Name it whatever you want, something intuitive like wind map will do just fine, and make sure the little render icon is on. If there are any LOD models on your object, make sure to do the same process with all of them. Then select all of the LODs and go over to your UV shader editor. A useful shortcut is Control F10 to get there. Very handy if you swap a lot to memorize these shortcuts. So this map is basically a gradient that tells the wind shader how much the object should be affected by the wind and where. The gradient goes from 0 at the bottom, since the y-axis here is 0 in the UV map, going all the way up to 1 at the very top, where the wind shader will be affecting the object with 100% force. Now just to show a little bit more complicated example, here in the case of a tree, the UV wind map here is just a projection from view from the front side. And you can see that on the bottom here, the wind isn't really affecting the leaves at all, and near the top it's affecting more and more. Now an even better example is this willow tree here that has hanging vines. This is where the power really comes in with this method. You can see that the vines are rotated 180 degrees in the UV map. This causes it so the top part, or rather the bottom part of vines, is being affected more than the top. This effect cannot be achieved by just using the height of the vertex in each object. The grass is basically perfect, but all you want to do is scale it down and move it just a little bit down, because you don't really want any value to being exactly 1, because it's a little bit too strong bendage. Now you can go ahead and export your model in FBX or whatever format that you usually use. FBX is the standard one, and export it with the same settings that I have here. Now I'm going to bring both my models in here. So I have the grass model here. This is pretty big because it's a meter by meter, so you might want to scale this down in Blender. What you want to do is create a material. You can either create and look for the material, or you press create and just press M to quickly create a new material. A little life hack there in Unity, and call this grass mat. You could go ahead and apply it. Frick, you could even go and apply this, but that doesn't do much. Now I want to make the shader. So in order to make the shader, go here, create, and you need to have URP. So if you don't have URP, you need to do the same thing as I showed in the beginning. Go to the shader graph tab, URP, and choose an unlit shader graph. You can use a lit shader graph or unlit, doesn't matter, it changes later, but for my use case, I'm going to use unlit and call this a grass shader. Now you can double click the shader graph, and this is all we have. Never mind, I don't want unlit, I want lit. I thought I needed unlit because I'm not using any lighting, at least not for this graph, but it also gives you other things. Now, in order to start with, to get the alpha, I do not recommend just grabbing this in here because we want to reuse this. The grass is just an example. We're going to create a texture 2D and call this texture mask. drop in here, bring it out, and look for a sample texture 2D. We're not going to connect this to the base color. We're going to connect this to the alpha. And then for the color, we're going to add a new variable called color. We could leave it as that. And just connect that, connect that into the base color. Another very important thing that we're going to need right away is a float called alpha clipping threshold. You know, alpha clipping threshold. And you see there is no alpha clipping here. Actually, there is. But if you don't have it, then you need to make sure you enable alpha clipping right here. And we just connect this. And with this shader graph, if we go to the grass mat after saving, we can click up here and look for it. The name, grass shader. And we could drag our map into here. And now you can see we have a very poor, very pixelized grass because you want to increase the alpha threshold. That makes it a little bit smoother. And also, if you're getting this weird clipping thing up here, which is very common, is the wrap mode because this texture is being wrapped. So if you were to apply this on an object that has bigger UVs, you would see it wrap. And make sure this is set to clamp. And that gets rid of that annoying line. There is one small problem with this. It's working, but the backside is invisible. I've seen a lot of people, basically you duplicate this and just rotate it by 90 degrees. And that doesn't fix it, but it does also double the amount of vertices. So I have a different method. Where is it? Render both faces. And no, it is not that simple, because if you render both faces and you go look at the back, it's a little bit off. You can see the sun, the shadow's right here. So the sun is coming from, let me make this bigger. You can see the sun is coming from that way, but it's still dark. The reason is because the normal is that way. So this face thinks it is facing away from the sun. To fix that, we need to flip the normals, but only when it's on the back side. So how do we do that? If we get the normals, which is a normal vector, set it to tangent. It says also right here, the normals is in tangent space. This is the normals. So if we just select this into here, nothing will change because I'm just assigning its normals to its normals. But if we put this through a flip node and go ahead and flip everything and put this into normal, it's going to flip its normals. So now you can see there's a bit of a shading artifact here. But now you can see this side is bright and this side is also bright because now the normal has been flipped towards that way. But we only want to be on one side. In order to fix that, there is a node called isFrontFace. So now it's checking whether we're looking at the front face. And this has to be the fragment shader because we're doing it per pixel, not per vertex, because the vertex can't have two normals. So we're changing this based on the pixel, not on the vertex. All right, so now we're going to place this flip into a branch node. Well, first is front face. So now if it is the front face, don't do anything. Don't flip it because it's correct. If it's not the front face, however, flip it. And we connect that into the normal. And now you can see this side is bright and this side is dark. Precisely what we need. If I go ahead and rotate this even more, dark, bright. That is working perfectly. Now, this method isn't going to be needed if we decide to have our normals facing directly upwards. This is what I'm doing with this so that the grass is more evenly shaded and it has a more stylized look to it. I'm not going to show you how to do that. I'll do that maybe once I show you how to make proper grass, because this by far is not proper grass. But since we are making the shader, I will show you how to easily turn this off. It's very simple. We just get another branch and also add a variable boolean called flip back faces. Bring that in and put that into the predicate. So if it's true, we want it to flip it. If it's false, we don't want to flip it. So we bring that back in and plug that into the normal. Once we save it, if you click on the grass material here, you can now see there is a variable or a boolean here that allows us to flip it or not flip it. Now it's time for the fun part. It's the wind shader part. This is the part that is the most important one. I haven't seen many people actually make it in this method, so I think it'll be very interesting. So let's get this grass model. The method I am talking about here, if you look at the single grass strand, as the grass bends, it bends downwards. Most tutorials just make it so that the grass bends or just displaces towards the side, but I want this to also bend downwards. I could also have it bend downwards even harder so that, say, this actually probably makes it look more natural, but here it's bending underneath the floor. So 1 is probably a little bit too high. And the fact that it bends downwards, that is what makes these nice... Let's go ahead and save that. That's what makes these nice kind of patterns, the wind patterns. You don't really get that nice effect if it doesn't bend downwards. Now, in order to achieve that effect, we got to start from the beginning. First, we need to actually displace this, just even a little bit. In order to do this, we use in the shader graph the position right here. We want to offset this position. So first, we're going to have to get the position of each vertex, called just the position node, and in world space. And if we just select out to the position, nothing will change because it is setting the position to its position. Well, would you look at that? It disappears because we are setting the, there it is. The reason for that is because this is in object space, it even says right here, and this is in world space. So what is happening is we're checking the world position of this grass, and it is off the world, so like -x, and then displacing it from its origin, -x, that amount. So that's why it's not going to work. So what we need is to transform it from world position to object position. So we're going to add a transform position and turn that from world to object position. And now we're just setting its position to its own position. Now, how do we displace it? Well, yes, you probably guessed it. You add to the position. We could go ahead and hide that and hide this and hide that. So it's a little bit more organized. We could immediately, so you want to add a noise texture. It's way too big, so you want to scale this down. Now, we don't want to displace it on every single axis, so we're going to make it combine RGB. And we're going to displace this only on the x-axis for now. And let's see, if we just save this, there you go. It is being displaced. This is correct. This is what we want. Now, in order to make this move over time, pretty simple, you want a tiling and offset. Plug that into the simple noise. And then you want a time. So you take the time of it and connect this to the offset. Yes. And you can save that. It is going very fast. And one problem is this is being offset in the X and YZ. You can see it's going diagonally. Let's make it to, so it only goes into X. So let's go ahead and put you through a combine again. And the X, connect that there. So now it's being moved only in that direction, which is what we want. Now, we definitely want to scale this down, let's say to 10. Maybe even more, 5. There you go. Now, another problem we have is the grass is, the center's here, but it's right here. The reason is because this is going from 0 to 1. So it's offsetting it at a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 1. We want to change that. So after the noise has been being calculated, we want to subtract half. And now it's going from 0.5 or negative 0.5 to 0.5. And if you wanted to fix it so it's on a scale from 0 to 1, rather from -1 to 1, you just multiply by 2. Now it's going from 1 to -1. I think the noise is still too large, so let's bring that down to 1. There we go, that's a lot better. Now, another problem we have is that it's being offsetted the entire thing. We want the bottom to not offset at all. Now, in order to make this actually work, we need to bring in a UV node. Set it to the second channel. Make sure all of your objects that is going to be using this method, the UV wind map is going to be the second channel. If you're using light maps, then go ahead and use the third channel, because this is the zero, I guess the first, second, and third, right? Because the order doesn't matter. It doesn't care about the names, it cares about the order. Now, we care about the y-axis, so go ahead and separate it, or split it. And I guess this is the x and this is the y-axis. You could double check this always. If you're not sure, you can always double check it by connecting to the base color. And you can see here it's black, and here it's white. That is perfect. So we're going to connect the color back to color. We are now going to multiply the end result with its height. And there we go. We could also change the color to be green. Let's make the green stand out for now so you can see. This is where most tutorials would end. However, what's very important here now is adding the vertical part to it. But before that, we need to add a strength modifier. What I mean by that is you want to run this through a multiply, like I had before. I just deleted it for some reason. Add a float, call it bend strength. Save that, and this will control how strong it's being affected. So that will come handy later. Now, if you want this, let's go double it so it's stronger. And let's also make this a bit faster. To make it faster, you just bring the time and multiply it by 2. Yeah, that's work. Very crucial part to get this nice waving effect. Because as it is right now with this tiling offset, if we duplicate this a few times over, you can see they're all moving exactly the same. What we want is the wind to propagate. So first it starts pushing it to the side here and then goes through. We're going to make that real quick. So we can move this offset off to the side. And what we're going to need to do this is a position. In fact, we're going to want the absolute world. We're going to split this so that we can have it on the XY axis. We don't, because this is X, Y, and Z. The green channel is the Z axis, so it's a little bit confusing here. And then we can combine it back. Just like that. So the X and the Y. Sorry, in Unity, the Y axis is upwards, as you can see right here. We need the X and Z axis. So X and Z, because we want this to kind of, the texture you can imagine to propagate on this flat plane. And we're going to connect this to the UV, because we don't want the simple noise to tile on its own UV. We want to create a new UV, which is the world. And you can see now it is propagating. That already works. If we want to visualize this, we can by creating a plane and bringing it up. Let's have it just to the side of it. And let's go ahead and add this grass to this. Now that is not necessarily what we want to see there. What we want to see is the tiling of this noise. So we can do that by connecting this. First we need from the shader and connect it there. We save that. And now we should be able to see, there you go. No matter where this is, the texture is kind of mapped to the world. And so you can see that as the black parts, this goes towards the negative. And then as the white parts go over it, it goes towards the positive, just kind of going across it. And if we were to rotate this, you can see it is stretched because we're not mapping it on the Z axis, only on the XY. So we can delete that and connect the color back up and connect you back up here. There we go. And we can also control this tiling if you want it to be smaller. But if you want to do that, you just go ahead and change the scale of it. Well, that's only if you're using a texture, which is another pretty important point I want to bring up, is noise is very expensive to calculate. And calculating the noise for each vertex on each strand of grass is a little bit too expensive in my liking. So what I did, and what I recommend you to do, is make your own wind map. So this is a tileable texture. I made this in Photoshop. Your method of making this highly depends on what programs you have. You can make this probably in a GIMP. One thing, if you're using a texture, what you want to do is because when you're using a texture for a position, you need to sample texture LOD and select that as the wind map. And now you could connect it, as you can see. And if I put this through, it is more chaotic because this is the scale. But for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm just going to use the simple noise. If you want it to be more optimized, I do recommend using this, however. So I have the propagation, and the problem with this now, even if we select this and bring up the bend strength like 10, you could see it is propagating, but it doesn't feel like grass. This is what most tutorials show you, is just to kind of push it along the axis. What we want to do is instead turn this into kind of a circular function. So that, let me separate one of the grasses. So that when it pushes it, instead of just going to the sides, it takes a circular path like that. So what we want to do is take the strength of it, so how much is being displaced on the x-axis, and then let's we're going to need this for the future, but for now just put a multiply, and then we're going to need this. We're going to plug this into a cosine and a sine. This is how you make, well, this is how you graph a circle, right? And now what we're basically saying is the amount it is moved by the x, I want to move that down by the same amount, but y. Well, it's not the same amount, it's the cosine amount of that, or the sine. The point is, depending on the value that we saw earlier on the plane, it moves it on the x and the y. So when it's 1, ideally it moves it on the x by 1, and the y also by -1, because it's going to be like that. So technically this should just work if we connect this one to the x, because this is going to be how much we move on x, and this one to the y, sorry, the opposite way around. So if we just ignore this UV thing that we had in the past, this technically should work. You see now it is being placed upwards, so the circle ed, but you do see it is going down here and then back up and then back down here. So it's sort of working. And now here we need to multiply by -2 times pi. And this sort of, it kind of breaks here. So it's giving very interesting results, but this just basically centered it. You'll see the result of that fairly soon. And to fix this, we want to now multiply both of these by its UV wind map. So we just need to plug both of these into multiply, a multiply node, and plug U in. And now plug these in instead. Now this is closer, but as you can see, still not quite there yet. We need to make a few modifications. So we could delete this now because we do not need this because we're multiplying it over here. We're gonna plug U into a subtract. And then also we're gonna plug U into a multiply. Let's go ahead and make some more space here. So we're going to plug you into a multiply. For now, we're going to keep it just at 1. And then we're going to multiply you once more by itself. And then connect you instead of that. By subtracting it from the height, we basically, instead of telling, because the xy coordinates of a circle, the cosine and sine is giving you the xy from the bottom, so how much to displace it at x. But if you imagine, if the grass is straight up, pointing straight upwards, the y is currently at 1 because the circle point is up here, and the x is at 0 because it is at the center of the graph. And that would basically be telling it, okay, displace it upwards by that much. But we don't want to displace it at all. And in fact, it's supposed to go downwards. So we have to subtract it from the original height, so that now it's telling us by how much you have to move it down to bring it to that position. And then here we multiply it. This will be our vertical bend strength. So we're going to add a new float, call it vertical bend strength. This is a useful one to have, even though most of the time it's going to be set to -1. For different objects, you might want it to be a bit different. Now you can see it's working. It was working. It was moving it upwards. Now it's moving it only to the side. And that's because the vertical bend strength is 0. If we set to 1, so we're telling it to move it down when it's bending out of the way. So the bend strength is a little bit too strong. Let's set to like 1. In general, right here, bend strength, 1, because we're multiplying it by -2 pi. 1 is the largest value you would really realistically want here, because that is 1/4 of a circle, thanks to this multiplication here. If we set to 2, it is now being bending it by 180 degrees. If we set to 3, it's going to be bending it by 270, and 4 is going to be doing a full 360. So I really do suggest limiting this factor. So by clamping it, the minimum you want to be -1, and the most you want to be 1. And usually 1 is also a little bit too large, so I usually like to go for like 0.8 or something, just so it doesn't clip through the floor. It's almost clipping here. So you can see that with this shader, the shader is basically complete now. If we just duplicate this quite a lot, of course it'd be better if you like change the scale and everything. And also I do want to turn off cast shadows, so that's a lot smoother. You can see that it's got a very nice pushing effect. You could play around with this vertical bend quite a bit. You can make it a lot smaller, so now it's pushing it down really hard, which is not really nice, but it could be interesting for some models. And if you have any models that are hanging, so if I were to take this grass, for example, and make it, sorry, that's the wrong thing, and make it hanging, for this one, I would have to set you to 1, so that's now being pushed upwards. That's actually really cool. And if you want to be push even more upwards, you could set it to 2 or 10. Or that's 100 or 10. And you can't see it because of the bottom ones. But there you go. Now it does, if you go too high, it does kind of do some strange things because it is being pushed that way. In order to fix that, I actually haven't done this, but you could probably clamp it. But to avoid that, just don't make this value too strong. You could do 4s or 3s a little bit strong. If you want to make this grass look better, I know, like I said, this isn't a grass tutorial, but this looks so bad, I kind of want to fix it. We could do this by having the normals point upwards. We could easily do this by just making a plane, make sure it's in the middle, and bring this upwards. Now, what we're going to do is, let's just select the higher LD model for now. If we go into edit mode and go into normals, we can see the direction the normals are being placed. If we add a transfer attribute, or a data transfer, select face corner data, custom normals, and nearest corner of nearest face, and select this as a source. Note, it says right here, auto smooth has to be on, so turn that on. If I apply this, you can see all of the normals are pointing straight up. And then re-export it as FBX, the FBX model. You could delete this and bring it back in. Now, you would say it looks worse. Why? Because we are inverting the back face. Remember, this back face is pointing upwards, and now it's back face. It's flipping it, so it's pointing downwards. So the sun thinks it's pointing the opposite way. That's wrong. We don't want to flip it. And that's much better, way too vibrant. So let's bring that down. And just look at that. You can also match the ground color or the color of the grass to the ground a little bit better, and you'll get more of this kind of result. You could use this with anything. So let me give you an example. And this willow tree is the perfect example that I mentioned earlier. If, let's go ahead and, for example, duplicate this willow tree and select the one that we already made, so the wind. And then I have the willow tree vine material right here. So if I open that up, this is just a black and white texture of a willow. We'll have alpha here instead of black and white, but that doesn't matter too much. If I go like that, you can see it's basically working the same way, but I need to make sure that the vertical bend strength is set to -1. Sorry, not negative, positive. You can see it's being pushed upwards. That is way too much. 10. You can see it is going in a circular fashion. 1 is plenty. And then if we select this, it doesn't work because reasons. I think my plant wind shader is set up just a tad bit differently. Yes, I am using the actual alpha here. The reason for this is mine also supports textures if you want. Let's do that. Let's upgrade our grass shader to support textures as well. So instead of using a texture mask, which we've been using up until now, we can use any texture. And if you want to be a texture, I mean, it would already work, except for the fact that there is no color selected to the base color. So if you connect the texture to the color, to the base color, then now the texture will be on the color, and make sure the alpha is set to the alpha. There it is. Of course, we're gonna have to change our texture to support alpha, but that's simply, or our texture mask to support alpha, because currently it's black and white. So now we want it to be white and alpha. But if we want to use a normal texture, then use the color with alpha. This setup no longer works because now you see it's using the texture, and the texture is white, which is all right. The way to fix it is we multiply U by the color we had previously. So now white times the color equals our new color. And this also is an added benefit. If we do have a texture here, we could easily change the color of the texture if we want. So right here, we could easily change the color. Same as we're changing the white color, we can change the textured color as well. And of course, you need to change the black to be alpha. And that is how you make a wind shader that actually bends rather than displaces. At this point, the only thing they could do to make it even better is making or getting better models. This grass model here was only made quickly for you guys to follow along. If I show my model that I spent hours creating, you can see it works far, far better. I hope you found this tutorial insightful. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.